It feels like every company on Earth has become completely obsessed with subscriptions. Even car companies have looked at a perfectly good steering wheel and thought, you know what this needs? Monthly payments. Now, you've probably heard the phrase, you'll own nothing and be happy. Honestly, I kind of assumed people were overreacting. Sure, subscriptions can be annoying, but they're also often convenient. Sometimes they're even cheaper. So what's the big deal? Most people think they know the answer. Companies just make more money. Except that's not actually why this happened. And once I realized what it was, I stopped thinking the subscription economy was just a slightly annoying way to pay for things. I started wondering whether we'd accidentally built an economy that no longer rewards companies for making better products, but for making sure you can never really leave. For something people complain about so much, the subscription model has been remarkably successful. And that's strange, because nobody forced us into it. We chose it. That's right. This is your fault, motherfucker. Think about music. Buying CDs used to be normal. Then Spotify came along. For the price of 1 or 2 albums a month, you suddenly had access to almost every song ever recorded. That wasn't a trick. It was a genuinely better deal. The same thing happened with Netflix. Why buy shelves full of DVDs when you can have thousands of films instantly? Subscriptions didn't spread because consumers made bad decisions, they spread because consumers made perfectly rational ones. Every step made life a little cheaper, a little easier, a little more convenient, which, as experts call it, is generally considered a good thing. But when billions of people all make the same rational decision, the economy changes. That's the part many people miss. The subscription economy didn't win because companies convinced us to rent, it won because, at least in the beginning, it genuinely created more value. Which creates a much more interesting question. If consumers were better off, why did companies become so obsessed with subscriptions? Because whatever they discovered, it was worth transforming almost the entire economy for. Most people would say, because monthly payments generate more revenue over a longer period of time. And that's true. But it's not the whole story. For the whole story, we have to go back. Think about what happens when you buy something traditionally. A company spends millions designing a product, millions more advertising it, then, after all that effort, you finally become a customer. Epic. Except, from the company's perspective, that's also the moment something goes wrong. Because now you own it. The relationship is over. If they want your money again, they have to earn it all over again. Build another product, launch another marketing campaign, convince you to come back. Ownership resets the competition. Every new purchase starts from zero, but it also means something much bigger. Once you own something, the company loses control. It can't change the price. It can't adjust features. It can't learn how you use the product. It can't shape your behavior. And most importantly, it can't stop you from walking away. Ownership didn't just end the payment, it ended the relationship. And that's what companies hated. Because ownership didn't just give you the product, it gave you independence from the company. Now, imagine what happens to an economy when businesses discover a way to make sure that relationship never has to end. Because once one company figures that out, every other company wants to copy it. And once investors on Wall Street figure it out, the entire economy starts to change. Here's the strange part. Some of the companies leading the subscription revolution weren't even making that much money. Spotify still operates on razor-thin margins. Many software companies deliberately lost money for years, yet investors couldn't throw enough money at them. Why? Because investors weren't looking at today's profits, they were looking at something much more valuable. The future. Imagine 2 companies. Both make $1 billion this year. One has to convince people to buy its products all over again next year. The other already knows millions of customers will probably still be paying next month. Which business would you buy? Exactly. Neither. You don't have $1 billion. You can barely afford breakfast. The point is, investors aren't buying last year's revenue. They're buying confidence in next year's. And certainty is incredibly valuable. A predictable business is easier to value. easier to finance, easier to grow. Higher valuations mean more money. More money means faster growth. Faster growth means everyone else has to copy them. Which means subscription companies don't just earn recurring revenue, they become worth more. And once investors started rewarding that model, every CEO suddenly had the same incentive. Not just to build a successful company, but to build one people never leave. That's why software became subscriptions, why streaming became subscriptions, why browsers became subscriptions. They're all responding to the same economic incentive. But here's the part I think most people miss. Wall Street wasn't really investing in subscriptions, it was investing in something far more valuable. A long-term relationship with the customer. Because once you have that relationship, you don't just have predictable income. You have future opportunities. You can raise prices, introduce new products, bundle services, sell advertising, learn how people behave, improve the product, or change it completely. And once an entire financial system starts rewarding companies for keeping customers instead of simply winning them, you have to ask a very different question. What kind of products get built when the customer becomes the company's most valuable asset? Because if keeping customers becomes the goal, then products start evolving in a very different direction. Not just towards creating value, but towards creating relationships, and not the healthy kind. Not the kind where you both grow together, the kind where one side slowly becomes convinced they'd be completely lost without the other. Which is perfect for a subscription service. Now, how does a company actually build that kind of relationship? At first, the answer seems obvious. Build better products. And they do. But that's only half the story. Because once retention becomes the goal, something subtle changes. The question is no longer just, how do we create more value? It becomes, how do we become harder to leave? Those aren't always the same thing. Think about Spotify. The music isn't what keeps you there. It's your playlists, your recommendations, years of listening history. Spotify Wrapped. The longer you stay, the more Spotify learns about you. And the more it learns, the harder it becomes to imagine starting over somewhere else. Apple does the same thing. Your photos sync automatically. Your passwords follow you. Your watch unlocks your laptop. Your messages appear on every device. Every feature genuinely makes the product better, but every feature also makes the ecosystem more difficult to escape. The longer you use it, the more personal it becomes. And the more personal it becomes, the more dependent you become. Notice what's happening? These aren't dark patterns, they're genuinely useful. That's exactly why they're so effective. Every improvement creates value, but it also quietly increases dependency. Eventually, companies stop competing with better products. They start competing with better relationships. Or more accurately, relationships that are harder to abandon. Because once your files, your photos, your habits, your conversations, and years of your digital life all live inside one ecosystem, leaving no longer feels like switching products, it feels like starting your life over. The goal is no longer to build the best product, it's to build the product people become most dependent on. Because in a subscription economy, dependency isn't a side effect, it's an asset. And assets are incredibly valuable. Which leaves one final question. What happens once a company knows you're not going anywhere? Because once a customer becomes dependent, something much bigger changes. Competition. In a normal market, companies have to earn your business. If they raise prices too much, you leave. If a competitor builds something better, you leave. If they start shoving ads down your throat, you leave. That's how markets are supposed to work. But the subscription economy quietly changes the rules. Because once your photos live in one cloud, and your work depends on one piece of software, your music lives on one platform, and your smart home runs on one ecosystem, you're no longer choosing between products. You're choosing between staying and rebuilding your life somewhere else. That's a completely different decision. And companies know it. Which is why, over time, you start seeing the same pattern. Prices creep up, ads appear, features move behind more expensive plans. Licenses change, privacy policies change, not because companies suddenly became greedier, because they gained leverage. The negotiation no longer starts from zero. It starts with everything you've already invested. Your files, your habits, your history, your time. And that's the real business model. Not monthly payments, permanent leverage. Which makes you wonder, what does it actually mean to own something anymore? Maybe "you'll own nothing and be happy" was never really about ownership. Maybe it was always about control. Because ownership used to mean something very simple. You paid, the company left, the product was yours. If you bought a CD, no one could remove a song from it. If you bought a DVD, Netflix couldn't wake up tomorrow and decide you'd never watched it in the first place. Today, that's no longer guaranteed. We've already seen movies disappear from people's digital libraries. Games become unplayable. Features removed after products were sold. Prices increase. Ads appear, not because those companies broke the system, because they are the system. The subscription economy didn't just change how we pay. It changed who stays in control after the sale. For hundreds of years, the moment you bought something, the relationship ended. Today, the relationship never ends. The company keeps updating, keeps collecting data, keeps changing the rules, keeps deciding what your product can and can't do. And because leaving becomes harder every year, most of us simply stay. That's why I don't think the biggest risk is that you'll own nothing. It's that you'll slowly stop noticing the difference between owning something and merely having access to it. Because once companies stop competing to sell you products and start competing to keep you inside relationships, the balance of power quietly shifts. And history has shown something interesting about power. Once someone has it, they very rarely choose to give it back.